Hundreds of thousands of AFA stream visits could reduce the national debt and maybe increase the gross domestic product. AFA Stream, formerly streaming.afa.net. Improvements to the economy are purely theoretical. Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It is Friday, February 7th, and we have had 3 stellar weeks of a brand new Trump administration, and we've seen this not only on the home front, but also in the foreign policy areas. And there's a brand new piece out from The Blaze from our good friend Jim Nels with the title, Trump, Milei, and Orban Lead a Conservative Resurgence Worldwide. So Jim Nels joins me now. And Jim, I think that's very aptly put. And we're seeing conservative leaders kind of rally around Trump as the head of the spear and basically trying to shift, I think, the world stage into a little bit more of populism, but conservative principles against these leftist globalist elites.
Absolutely. We're seeing a movement, and it is a global movement, where leaders are realizing that the people that they're supposed to lead and take care of actually want them to focus on them first. They don't want to be members of a global community. I'm not talking about being an isolationist. I'm not talking about, no one trading with each other or talking with each other. But I'm talking about the president of the United States should put Americans first. The president of France should put French people first. The president of Poland should put Polish people first. That's just the normal thing that they should do. And we're seeing more and more people say, I'm sick and tired of trying to take care of everyone else when I can't fill my car with gas, I can't feed my children, and I can't pay my rent. And you're worried about boys playing sports against girls, and you're worried about all these other things. I want to focus on making my country great, and I want to focus on me being successful so I can take care of my children.
Yeah, and this is the whole concept of national sovereignty, right? That nations require borders, nations require laws, and nations also require their own government to preserve and protect the interests and rights of their people. And functioning legitimate governments will have and understand, the very same rights that Polish people, that Hungarians, that Americans all have come from God, our Creator. So they're not going to actually look that different in terms of overarching concepts like individual freedoms and liberties, even the freedom of speech. I mean, some of these enduring principles that maybe look different depending on culture or technology and time frame, but the underlying principle has endured through the scope of human history. And so this kind of building coalition, I think, that you're referencing in this piece really is taking that concept and making it not just about American exceptionalism, but really about returning to what Roger Scruton once described, coming from the UK, as just the meaning of conservatism overall.
Absolutely. And again, when you come back to conservatism, it comes back, for me, to one thing: the family. Every person wants to take care of his or her own family. And in order for them to take care of their family, they need a couple of things to happen. They need the government to provide them with the protection that they need so that they can go out and become successful, and then, again, provide for their family. But most folks around the world, and Jenna, I travel globally for my job, they're the same thing. And all they want to do is do their job, come home, have a nice meal, play with their kids, and be left alone. And that's why we saw such a backlash. I'll use the United States as an example from the Biden administration, because the Biden administration didn't want to leave anyone alone. They wanted to tell me what type of dryer I could use in my house, what kind of stove I could use, what kind of water heater I could use, what kind of car I had to drive, how far I could drive that car. And they had to tell me who I was supposed to respect and who I was not supposed to respect, not based on that person's character, but based on that person's preference with whom they slept or how they wanted to dress. And working Americans just don't want that. Working people around the world don't want that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where the freedom and ability to choose what is best for ourselves and our families and to pursue happiness makes sense in the context of what our American founders rightly described. But that goes for any human being who has lived in any nation across the face of the earth, across human history. I mean, the ability to make decisions for ourselves. I mean, I'm choosing now to live in Florida because that's in my best interest and my choice, where other people, want to choose for some reason to live in California, but but then some people are choosing to leave California because their government structure is not doing so well. So but all of these decisions really should come down to government protecting the liberty, freedom, and opportunity, not in this kind of equity sense, but the opportunity for individuals and citizens of their own nations to choose their own best interest. So that, of course, gets us to President Trump's policy on illegal immigration and the kind of crackdown, because the left would suggest, well, illegals in this country should have the right to the same opportunities as Americans. And I'm thinking, well, no, our government is not obligated to protect their rights and interests. Their home country is. But our government here in America is obligated to protect our rights expressly over and above theirs. And when they are coming to this country, murdering our citizens, raping our citizens, committing crimes, violent crimes, even taking jobs away, all of these things, that not only then is not just a parallel track, it's actually a conflict between America's own national interests and our citizens versus these people who are coming and have basically a theft of our resources.
Absolutely. And, I even take a step back from that. The mere fact that they're here means that they committed a crime just by being here. Let's not even talk about the rape and the murder and the theft and all those things. They've already broken the law by being here. To my friends on the left, I would say, what other criminals do we want to forgive and allow to have the same rights as law-abiding citizens? Is it child molesters? Is it murderers? Is it rapists? Where do we draw the line? Because if you start allowing one group of criminals to have the same rights as law-abiding citizens, what's to stop the next group of criminals? I mean, come on, Jenna. Is it really so bad that this person was, having inappropriate relationships with a 12-year-old? After all, love is love. I mean, where do you draw the line? So you have to draw the line at people who break the law. If you're here illegally, you've already broken the law. Before you even commit a second crime, you don't deserve the same rights as an American. Trump understood that. The left does not, and that's why Trump is sitting in the Oval Office right now, getting things done at lightning speed.
Yeah, so well said. And I could not agree more. I mean, these bright line standards that we have in law have to have common sense. They can't just be arbitrary. Otherwise, they'll continue to be expanded and extended. And we've seen the result of the sexual revolution and this whole ridiculous thing that just, love is love, that now, we are at the point where our nation is actually suggesting a lot of the things that you said. I don't think Trump at all is going to go for that, thankfully. So maybe we're turning a corner. But you also mentioned in your piece, which listeners can find at The Blaze, that a lot of this shift has reflects more than political realignment. It signals a broader societal transformation, and that a lot of the more left-leaning or outright cultural Marxist socialist countries and governments like Canada, France, Germany, even the UK are facing mounting pressure from the right-leaning factions. How is this playing out on the world stage right now? I mean, I love it that America is finally a leader in common sense again.
It's great, isn't it? Well, if you look at some of these places, Canada, for instance, Trudeau is done. His government is over. They'll be replaced. You look at France. You saw the right Le Pen's party do extremely well in the recent elections. The Prime Minister of France had to resign. And then in the UK, you're seeing the Conservative Party do better and better. You're seeing folks like Nigel Farage and other folks just get people to realize that common sense is common sense. And again, it comes back to, at the end of the day, people want a country that takes care of them. They don't want a country that tells them who they're supposed to worship. They don't want a country that tells them who they're supposed to respect. They just want to be left alone as long as they abide by the law.
Yeah, so well said. And I know you got to go here pretty quickly, but one last question. This cultural upheaval that we've seen over the last 4 years, I love the Babylon Bee's response where it said there were two genders from, zero, BC all the way to 2021. Then there were like 75 plus until 2024. Now 2025, we're kind of back to reality. I think that, that signals exactly what is going on. Do you think that the era of the woke being in charge is finally over for America, regardless of what happens after these 4 years of Donald Trump?
We're definitely at a tipping point. I think if these 4 years are good, and I'm going to put a caveat on it, I think if we're able to see someone like a J.D. Vance or another MAGA Republican elected to be president after Trump is done with his second term, then we've definitely killed the woke. I think the woke is pretty much on life support right now, and as long as the economy does well and the country does well, woke will be dead on arrival.
Excellent. All right. Well, Jim Nels, really appreciate you dropping by this morning. You can follow him at Real Jim Nels on X, and you can read all of his pieces in a wide variety of publications. But this one is at the Blaze Media, so you can go to theblaze.com, and the title is "Trump, Milei, and Orban Lead a Conservative Resurgence Worldwide." And to kind of just continue on this conversation about the social and cultural upheaval. We've seen over the last 4 years, it was just bizarre to see all of these ridiculous transgender influencers that were coming into the White House, all of the appointments in the Biden administration that were, men dressed as women, and, the bizarre recognition of LGBTQ identity over talent and merit and common sense. And those of us who spoke out against this, we were called all kinds of names in the book and just saying, well, you're just full of hate, you're a bigot, all these nonsensical names that really don't matter ultimately when the left doesn't even have the proper definitions of their own terms. So I always think, well, okay, when you call me a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, a whatever, well, do you even know what those terms mean? It's actually meaningless when it comes from them because they don't even use language appropriately when they're calling a male a female. So what do their insults mean to me? Well, absolutely nothing, right? But to see all of this, and then to see the corporations like, we saw Bud Light, we saw John Deere, we saw, so many other corporations that were having all of this kind of woke nonsense being factored into their corporate policies, and they wanted to go along with the human rights campaign. I still want to know what incentives or what was at play for all of these corporations to go against common sense and even in some instances against their own bottom line. And they didn't care as much about losing a large segment of a consumer base. Who's drinking Bud Light? Who is buying John Deere tractors? Mainly red America, let's be honest. So why were they so willing to do that as this sort of cultural revolution against their own interests? And there had to be some kind of incentive. But now that we're seeing the rolling back of this, specifically with Mark Zuckerberg, especially, who I've said previously on this program, I don't think it's out of his own generosity or, goodness of his heart that he's saying, oh, we're going to stop the censorship and we've had reform, and he's playing nice with Trump. He would be singing a different tune, I am willing to bet, if Kamala Harris would have been, the fourth term of Obama. But the only reason we're seeing a return to common sense is because of Donald Trump. So he only has 4 years, right? And thankfully, those 4 years, I think he'll get a lot done. We need to codify a lot of his executive orders into law. And by the way, you can listen today to the latest episode of On Demand, my AFR exclusive podcast, where I sit down for a long-form conversation and a deep dive with Congressman Jim Jordan to talk about that very thing. Well, we're so excited about what Trump is doing. It is unfortunately temporary unless Congress really makes a lot of action over the next 2 and hopefully 4 years. So what does that look like? We're going to have that conversation on demand that you can go to afr.net or anywhere that you stream and listen to that program. But it really gets into a whole topic of where the cultural momentum is going, because we saw with the Trump mandate that overwhelmingly voters are rejecting the left's insanity in favor of simply common sense. But common sense comes from a recognition of reality. And reality, the world to which we are presented, if we are honest and recognizing the confines of reality, that we can't change reality. God, for his own sovereign purposes, created the world as we discover it. We do not create reality in our image. We recognize it because it comes from God. We then ultimately, as a culture, must therefore recognize our creator. And if we are unwilling to do that as a culture, if all we're doing is returning to common sense, then we will not get as far in American exceptionalism and in the culture war as we otherwise could. So we have to remember, this is not just about America First. It's not just about the MAGA movement. It's not just even about common sense. Ultimately, what needs to happen in this country is revival and a return to recognition of God's ultimate authority, and that we do not have any legitimacy separate and apart from him. And I'm going to talk about that entire concept with a very special guest coming up next, and her brand new book that you are not going to want to miss. We'll be right back with more.
Hey friends of 8 Days of Hope, this is Hannah Fletcher, your communications director. I wanted to say thank you so much for listening to Hope Reigns, a broadcast of 8 Days of Hope. Since 2005, we have existed to love and serve those in need in the face of natural and human disasters. We accomplish this mission through our rebuilding, rapid response, safe house, and mass feeding ministries. It's such a privilege to hear how God moves each and every week through our volunteers and leaders as they strive to provide both physical and spiritual healing to the brokenhearted. Today, we are grateful to have mobilized almost 60,000 volunteers from across the United States to love and serve over 10,000 families, to provide 45,000 meals, and to build 15 homes of refuge and freedom for survivors of trafficking. How great is our God? We thank you so much for your continued support of this ministry and the work that God calls us to. To learn more and get involved with our efforts, visit 8daysofhope.com. That's 8daysofhope.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, just returned from the presidential inauguration of President Trump and Vice President Vance. And let me tell you something, folks. There's an excitement in the air among millions and millions and millions of Americans who are ready for some common sense changes to come to our country. Guess what? We're going to Washington, D.C. again for our Spiritual Heritage Tour in June and September. We're over halfway full. If you want to go with us to see our nation's capital from a distinctively Christian heritage viewpoint, then you need to contact us. You need to go to wildmangroup.com, WILDMON group.com. We're also going to Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to Boston in October. For information on any of these tours, go to wildmangroup.com, WILDMON group.com.
We're going to get through it.
When this mom ended a bad relationship, she found out she was pregnant. After the father told her to get an abortion, Julia was confused and didn't know what to do or who to talk to.
I just knew that if I got an abortion, a part of me would be broken.
Julia was referred to a preborn network clinic where she was counseled and supported with the strength she needed to choose life.
I couldn't imagine my life without him. Because of them, he's here. We're going to get through it, and it's going to be okay.
Preborn provides hope, love, free ultrasounds, and the gospel in action to moms like Julia. To learn more about their life-saving work, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. Or visit preborn.com/AFR. That's preborn.com/AFR. All gifts are tax deductible.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. A first-grade teacher at a school in Pittsburgh, California, is defying federal orders to abolish LGBT and Black Lives Matter lessons. President Trump signed an executive order that would cut federal funding to schools that teach topics related to race, sex, gender, and politics, and that includes radical gender ideology and critical race theory, part of the president's plan to remove far-left indoctrination in grades K through 12. The teacher posted a video on TikTok showing her posting a giant LGBT flag in her classroom. In defiance, she unveiled a collection of storybooks covering topics like critical race theory. Now, this is the same district that employs a teacher who was disappointed that President Trump's would-be assassin missed his mark. So if the Pittsburgh Unified School District wants to defy President Trump's executive order, no problem, but they're going to have to find some other way to buy their textbooks and crayons because Uncle Sam is about to shut down their bank. I'm Todd Stearns.
Speaking truth with love. This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Welcome back. And as we've seen all of the wonderful accomplishments of Trump's second term in just the first 3 weeks, I'm so excited about the next 4 years. I mean, this is just so much that has been packed into this. The broader conversation about the cultural response and how maybe we are at a turning point in America, that the Trump mandate has completely rejected the utter absurdity of the left's cultural Marxism, their attempt to disregard common sense with men and women's sports, and not really having any enforcement of our rule of law on behalf of the American people, with things like trying to incentivize illegal aliens or just simply not secure our borders. All of these things and all of these policies, as we've talked about at length on this program previously, come down to a worldview perspective, because your policy always comes out of your worldview. What do you think about what government's purpose and its legitimacy are? So there is a brand new book from a very dear friend that is titled God Given or Bust: Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. This is by Cheryl Chumley, and the foreword is by Pastor Jack Hibbs, which I just absolutely love. So this is going to be a fantastic work. I'm so excited to read it. And Cheryl joins me this morning. So Cheryl, I can't think of a more timely topic.
Thank you so much for having me. And, you teed that up perfectly, because it is all about the worldview, right? And you're right. I think Americans' worldviews are shifting a little bit, and it is time to start discussing God-given individual liberties and rights instead of government-granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think the difference truly between the left and the right, or maybe ultimately the self-centered elitism that could be described as the Uniparty in Washington, versus statesmanship, versus what our founders recognized in the Declaration of Independence, that our rights are given by God and the sole purpose of a legitimate government is to preserve and protect them. That difference is what we're seeing drastically on display. And so you talk first in your book about American exceptionalism, and that even that term God-given is under attack in America. And I think we've been saying that for a while in a post-truth, post-God society, but hopefully, perhaps, we're trending back to recognizing truth.
Yeah, the left is very clever at changing the narrative of things, right? And then once you change the narrative and change the definitions, then you can change agendas and policies. And, it's not just God-given, right? Like if you talk about God-given rights and liberties, a few years ago, you would have been regarded as a nutcase by the left. But just look back at the last few years over the phrase Christian nationalist, right? Which is another way of saying what founding fathers gave us in this nation, the idea of rights coming from a creator and government only in place to preserve and protect those rights. That was turned into very cleverly under the Joe Biden administration. Negative. Once it gets turned into a negative, people are afraid to speak that as a positive, and they're afraid, and this is more important, they're afraid to embrace that as an ideal. And look, in America, the greatest war that we always, the school system, or, the greatest war is the idea of individualism versus collectivism. And I phrase that God-given versus government-granted in terms of rights and liberties.
Yeah, and that's exactly the juxtaposition of the worldview, is that our rights aren't merely privileges that are given by government and can be infringed upon and taken away at whim or at will. And we're seeing how much that's being played into Donald Trump's potential reduction or elimination of things like income tax, for example, where the government is just coming in and thinking that private property you don't really have a right to. If we want to come in and just take as much as we want of your hard-earned money and then spend it on whatever we want, we can. Where a biblically focused, correct worldview would say that a man is worth his wages and that private property is something that is God-given. And while tax as a general principle is legitimate of government, overtaxation is theft and stealing, and there is that balance there. And so how do you frame this in your book to help people who maybe don't have a biblical worldview, and yet they're capitalists, they're maybe even MAGA, they're very America first, but they need to see that only a biblical worldview actually brings you to these concepts and these principles. Otherwise, it's just a matter of political will and power, frankly.
Well, my chapters cover everything from, Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates, right, to the LGBTQ agenda, to even the chips wars and what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein and the failure of government to release necessary information about the Epstein scandal, the Epstein corruption, and the Epstein evil. So if you want one stark example of how the mindset shift has occurred in America, where the majority are looking to government to give rights and liberties and not to God, you only have to go back a few years to the coronavirus crazy we saw in America, where Americans willingly ceded their individual decision-making processes and rights and freedoms to, in many instances, local health bureaucrats who told them, you have to stay home, you have to wear a face mask, you have to take this shot, you have to keep your kids home from school, you're not allowed to go to work, and in many instances, you're not allowed to go to church because government knows best how to protect you from this virus. And then at the tail end of the coronavirus, we as Americans, supposedly free Americans, were put in positions of having to ask government for our rights and liberties back. And these are things government never should have been in the position to hold authority over in the first place. So when you look at that, you can see the mindset shift that has occurred in America, alarmingly so, that has taken us down a path away from God-given individual liberties and toward the very tyrannical government-granted liberties and rights. And this is something that we need to first be aware of, and then second, counter and start insisting our political leaders recognize they serve us, from the president to the teachers to the people that work in DMVs and post offices. They're there to serve us as humble public servants. And basically, we as tax-paying legal American citizens are their bosses because we take our rights from God.
So well said. I mean, I could not have put that better. And I'm speaking with Cheryl Chumley, who's my special guest this morning, and she has a brand new book, the author of God-Given or Bust. So the book is titled God-Given or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. I mean, this is the only way to save America, because America was founded on the Judeo-Christian worldview. And so many on the left claim that when we invoke these timeless truths and principles and we reject the notion of Marxism, whether it's race Marxism, cultural Marxism, I mean, all different aspects that outflow from that somehow that's just kind of a boogeyman phrase. I don't believe so at all, because we're seeing how the left, even through things like DEI, I mean, they're trying to oppose different classes and to then say that everybody has to be made equal, or with this notion of equity. And we've seen how damaging that is to our individual rights and our ability to pursue and exercise liberty and freedom. So what commentary overall on Marxism and really explaining that do you have in this book?
I just go into the various ways that Marxism, which I'll explain that in a second, but I just go into the various ways in which Marxism has seeped into our politics and culture in ways that we perhaps don't recognize, but we even have gone so far as to embrace and normalize. And I don't want conservatives to go down the rabbit hole of defining democracy versus progressivism versus socialism versus communism versus Marxism, because really, if you look at that from a broad view, they're all one and the same. They just bring us to an end game of collectivism at a different speed. Really, the boogeyman here is individualism versus collectivism. And the ways that those seep into society are, if you just look at our political system and you see what Trump is discovering by way of waste and corruption in many of our agencies, that's something that a morally compassed America with people who understand that God is the leader of our country and government is only there to serve and protect and therefore should stay in a role of limited powers, that's something that our nation would never have accepted. But we've turned a corner in America where we are so frequently accustomed to expecting and then demanding our government take care of us in a variety of ways, right? From housing assistance to social entitlements, welfare, and things like that. Remember Barack Obama, the food stamp president? He was praised for that instead of scorned. We're conditioned in so many ways to look to government for solution that we've forgotten government is not the solution in America. They're only the political class can only secure our individual liberties and freedoms for a short time. Trump, as great as he's rolling along right now in the last couple weeks of his first couple weeks of office, he's only there 4 years. What happens when he leaves office? If we don't reorient him and make the case that our rights come from God and our liberties come from God, then we're going to be fighting the same political battles over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's so true that we won't be able to correct everything into perpetuity for just the next 4 years. Otherwise, the founders would have been able to secure that initially at the founding. I mean, this does require constant vigilance. And that's really the difficulty of something like the American experiment, is that it does rely on the persistence of a biblical worldview into the future. And so, as we're talking, Cheryl, about President Trump and how much he's done, and then this whole juxtaposition of individualism versus collectivism, which I love how you frame that, because that really is what it's about. Is this common good that has morphed then into collectivism, or is it genuinely a common good in a biblical view that results in protecting the individual? How much of this do you see in President Trump having an actual comprehensive worldview on this, or is it really, in your view, more the people around him that they're all kind of pushing this in terms of an America First agenda? Or, I mean, how do you see that? Because I think the question of the biblical view of a Trump administration is fascinating.
That's a really good question. And just to put out front, I've never met Donald Trump, so I don't know him personally. But I do see a big difference between his first administration and his rhetoric now, both on the campaign trail and in his second administration. And one thing that I took optimism from was that in his inauguration speech, he said, "We will never lose our country. We will never lose our God." And that tells me that at least he recognizes the fact that in America, God is tied to our government, and you can't remove God without maintaining a government that's limited in scope. So I'm not positive about his Judeo-Christian beliefs. I'm not positive about his Christian faith. But the thing is, when I say God-given individual rights and liberties, I'm not talking about Bible thumping here. We don't need a preacher in the White House, and we probably don't want one, right? that we fled the Church of England and founded this nation on a quest for religious liberty, religious freedom, first and foremost. And so we don't need somebody preaching from the White House. But the people he surrounded himself with at least recognized the fact that government is supposed to be limited, and it's a law and order type nation where you go by the Constitution, and the authorities that are vested and specified in the Constitution to the federal level, and the rest, according to the 9th and 10th Amendment, are best left to the people and to the states. So whether he governs from the perspective of Judeo-Christian faith and a Judeo-Christian awareness of how biblical principles are intertwined with America's government and America's founding, or he just comes at it from the idea of a limited democratic republic put forth in the Constitution, and then it's the principles of the Constitution that guide him, in the end it doesn't matter. Right? Because you can be an atheist and still benefit in this nation from the ideal of God-given individual liberties and rights, so long as your politicians are humble and recognize that they work for you.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. And I think that that whole idea that we don't want the church as government or government controlling the church is exactly what Thomas Jefferson expressed in his letter to the Danbury Church that now often gets misquoted as the church has no ability to influence government. And of course, we see from the Bible that there are 3 different spheres of government that God ordained: the church, the family, and the civil government, but all of those come under still his authority as the divine lawgiver and the creator. And that's really the point of emphasis here that I think you're making, Cheryl, is that God-given means that only through God's legitimacy does the authority for each of those institutions to function and operate exist. And it has to be consistent with biblical truth if we have a legitimate and morally upright society. And you do talk in the book, in just the last few minutes we have with you, about how there's also a war on the family, or the chapter is titled "The Evil One Has the Family Unit in His Crosshairs." So not just civil and church, but also the family unit really has come under attack, I think, because we are failing to recognize God-given.
We are, because, families are the foundation of any society, so it's only natural that leftists would seek to attack and divide so as to conquer families, right? They want to be that wedge in between a parent's relationship with the children, and they want to become the parents of children. This is your communist nations, right? The children are owned by the state. And so if we don't recognize the importance of traditional family and seek to keep families united and not divided, that just opens the door for Marxist, communist, collectivists, and so forth to come in and destroy basic building blocks of any civil society.
Yeah, and that is so well put, that in order to have a God-given civil government is obligated to recognize the independence and the God-given authority that is given to the church, that is also given to parents. And parentage is under attack in this country when we're seeking to undercut not only parental rights in favor of the government, but also what it even means to be parents, commoditizing children and not recognizing their humanity, even with things, not only abortion, but even after birth, with the adoption into gay and lesbian quote unquote families or marriages. I mean, all of these things have significant implications. And I'm so excited for your book. So Cheryl Chumley's book, God-Given or Bust: Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. And where can people find this book and pre-order?
Of course, at Amazon and anywhere books are available. Thank you, Jenna. You're so brilliant.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and you absolutely are a kindred spirit on this topic, as well as many others, Cheryl. And she also hosts the Bold and Blunt podcast at the Washington Times. I've been privileged to be a guest there several times, so appreciate your work there, and thanks so much for your work and for dropping by this morning.
Oh, thank you for having me. God bless.
Absolutely. God bless. All right. Well, we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Culture is a product of us being placed in a particular location, and it is God's desire that his light bearers would culture or cultivate a particular area.
Join Abraham Hamilton III as he presents the biblical case for cultural engagement. It's a powerful video resource from the American Family Association's Cultural Institute series.
You and I create the culture of our country.
Visit afastore.net.
Weekday mornings at 8 Central, Pastor Jeff Shreve offers real truth for today.
I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church in Texarkana, Texas, and the founder of From His Heart Ministries.
The world around us is rapidly changing, but God and His truth will never change.
I may be the host of the show, but I want God's Word and His truth to be the star of the show.
Join Pastor Jeff Shreve each weekday morning at 8 Central for Real Truth for Today on American Family Radio.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Walker, praise the Lord. We've seen 13,000 answers to prayer. That's 13,000 Bibleless believers around the world who had no hope of a Bible but entered the AFR listening family. You've blessed 13,000. Our goal, 16,000. We have to do it by February 10th. Here's 3 praying for Bibles. Ahmed in the Middle East is a former Muslim. When he became a believer, he was beaten by radicals, but more than anything, he's praying for a Bible. Miriam is a widowed mother of 3. Her husband was murdered by the Boko Haram regime on the continent of Africa. She wants the Bible to raise those children to know and love Jesus. And Carlo is a former shaman in South America, now a follower of Christ, praying for a Bible. You've blessed 13,000 Bibleless believers, 3,000 to go by February 10th. It's $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20. And Walker, we're praying we can get it done.
Give generously at 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org, sendbiblesnow.org.
Do you believe in the absolute inerrancy of God's holy word? Do you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to radically change lives and empower us to live like Christ? At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement of people across our nation and across the world who hold fast to the authority of the Bible and the hope of holiness. We are working today to equip tomorrow's pastors and Christian leaders through biblical and theological education and practical ministry that's accredited, affordable, online, and highly personal. Our programs include undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kinds of pastors we need leading our churches in the future, we invite you to learn more about partnering with us through giving. Learn more about Wesley Biblical Seminary by visiting us at wbs.edu today.
Speaking truth with love. This is Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Welcome back. Well, speaking about God-given rights and that America was founded on a biblical worldview premise, and that we have the obligation of eternal vigilance and to pass down that history and that protection of American exceptionalism to the next generation, so we ensure a moral and upright society that really, overall, we kind of haven't had in the last 4 years. Hopefully, we are seeing a return, at least a little bit, to sanity and common sense through the Trump administration. But as my last guest said, you know, this is something that Trump can't just into perpetuity change. It will require a lot of work over the next 4 years, but the next 40 and hopefully the next 400 and beyond if the Lord tarries. So we have a new American Family Radio exclusive podcast that started on January 21st titled America's Providential History. God watches over his creation and directs the course of mankind to fulfill his promises. Any view of history that denies his providence is not true history at all. This podcast presents the real story of America by exploring the hand of God in our history. This is so exciting, and host Stephen McDowell joins us now to talk more about this. So, Stephen, thanks, and what can listeners expect from this AFR exclusive?
Well, thanks for having me on, Jenna, and I'm certainly excited about doing this podcast. I've been teaching and writing about this subject for over 40 years because, the founders of America had a providential view of history. They understood that God not only created everything, but he sustains it. Even the non-Christians like Franklin saw the providence of God in the Constitutional Convention, and George Washington, James Madison spoke of the providence of God over and over, the finger of the Almighty. So we're going to explore the colonization, the birth, growth, and development of the United States. We're going to look for this in centuries of our history, and we're going to see how God was at work moving in the lives of individuals in order to accomplish his purpose. God not only has a purpose for individuals, he has a purpose for nations. He raises up nations and puts down nations. And the founders of America believed that God was intimately involved in giving birth to our nation, our form of government, unique ideas and principles, some of which you just mentioned earlier, that form the foundation of our nation and making it exceptional. They understood that and believed it. They wrote about it, and they demonstrate it. So we're going to be examining all kinds of different stories and principles in early America to give us ideas today of how we should govern our lives and govern our nation.
And this is so timely and I think excellent that you're endeavoring to have a dedicated podcast that will teach the truth about America's history. I mean, we've seen the left, Stephen McDowell, my special guest this morning, try to purposefully undercut America's founding and basically rewrite it into things like the 1619 Project or saying systemic racism, because of the 35th Compromise, and some of these other things that are just ultimately grounded in their revisionism rather than truth about American history. And so, what are some examples that you're exploring of teaching the truth? I mean, things like, even Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Church, where people have this false notion of separation of church and state, saying, hey, Christians, you're the only segment of civil society that can't participate in government. I mean, it's just utterly ludicrous. But what are some of the topic examples that you're exploring?
Well, we began with kind of an overview. I'd looked at the Bible as the rock of our republic. That's what President Andrew Jackson said in relation to that book, because without the Bible, there would be no United States of America. It forms the foundation of our civil laws. It was acknowledged in our charters. Individuals acknowledged the truth in the Bible in their wills and in their writings. So that's a great overview. Then we've looked at the preparation for the seed of America, how God was at work in Europe preparing those who came and planted America. We looked at providential events in the early colonies in Virginia and Massachusetts and William Penn and how God used him. And we're going to continue the story of God moving and giving birth to America. We will take a look at many of our individuals, famous ones like George Washington, who was a man of providence. Others people may not have heard of, like Benjamin Rush. He was the third most famous founding father. And by the way, Benjamin Rush, he so believed in the providence of God that, he made the comment that I cannot help adding an acknowledgement of the good providence of God and having preserved me from falling down the stairs and from not being mugged when he walks out in the street. So he said, look, God so watches over our lives, we don't even know how much he keeps and preserves us. So I want to give thanks to God because I didn't fall down the stairs this morning and I didn't get mugged. But so we'll look at famous people. We'll look at those most Americans don't know about. We'll look at stories of how God worked in their providence. And we're going to look at principles, too, principles of government and economics and others. And all these are valuable for us today as we seek to rebuild America, restore America, reform America, because as you mentioned, it's eternal vigilance. It is the price of liberty. It takes re-educating the American people in how to live in liberty so that we can maintain that liberty today and pass it on to posterity, and we'll be looking at that.
I'm speaking with Stephen McDowell, who's the host of the brand new AFR exclusive podcast, America's Providential History. You can go to afr.net, click on the podcast tab, and find that podcast as well as on demand. My podcast as well, and mine today is a conversation with Congressman Jim Jordan about enduring wins and how we need to codify some of President Trump's executive orders so that we can continue to preserve and protect America for the future. So, all of these things are so important, and understanding the foundation of our country, the purpose of forming a more perfect union, what that means. And one of the things that I've been hearing recently, especially in the context of the new Trump 2.0 administration, Stephen, is this whole concept of liberty and freedom and what that actually means. And one of the definitions that I love so much is from Os Guinness, who describes it as liberty is not the freedom to do what we want, but rather the freedom to do what we ought. And I think from a biblical worldview framework, when we talk about freedom in Christ, when we talk about freedom in civil society, the ability to exercise our liberties, pursue happiness, all of those things, the well-ordered nature of it can't be discarded, because the left just wants basically just absolutely perverse licentiousness. That's not true liberty and freedom. There have to be guardrails, and they should be guardrails that are specifically moral. As Christians, if we are following what the Bible prescribes for the Christian life, freedom in Christ means that we are not addicted to sin any longer, and that we have the freedom to choose good and to live uprightly within the moral bounds, and we will be happier and healthier and ultimately have a better life because we are choosing Christ. And so how does that whole concept translate into America's founding?
The founders had a Christian view of God and a Christian view of man. They understood that man is sinful, desperately wicked. His heart is full of deceit, as they wrote, and that only Christ can transform man and give him a new nature and a new heart. And that gets at the foundation of how you define liberty. To the secularist, liberty is I've got freedom to do whatever I want to do. To the Christian, I have freedom to do God's will. And so in the United States, what was unique about us, we had freedom to obey God. And as Benjamin Rush said, Christianity is the only true and perfect religion, and that in proportion as mankind adopts its principles and obeys its precepts, they'll be wise and happy. So we have the freedom to adopt the principles of the Christian faith and obey them. That is what produces flourishing, happiness, political prosperity, and every other kind of prosperity. But they understood it's only the Christian faith that provides the transformation of the heart as well as the renewal of the mind to enable a people to live in liberty. And so that's why, in order for us to promote liberty in the future, we have to sow the truth of the principles of Christianity as they apply personally in our life, but also as they apply civilly, because the principles of the Christian faith are the foundation of our civil laws, because they are laws of liberty.
And so well put and well described. And in just the last 2 minutes I have with you, Stephen McDowell, and again, the podcast that you can find at afr.net is America's Providential History. What's your response when, clearly we have founders who understood this, they promoted biblical principles, but we hear the objection so often, well, the founders weren't really Christians, they were deists, they didn't care about God, look at all of these other examples. What's your response to that kind of dismissal of this entire conversation?
Well, all but 2 or 3 of the men who signed the Declaration and that were at the Constitutional Convention were Orthodox Christians. They professed faith in Orthodox Christianity. Now, I don't know their heart. Were they all regenerate in their heart? That's for God to decide, but we can judge them by their fruit and by their words. And even the non-Christians, like Benjamin Franklin, those are usually the ones people bring up today. Oh, they weren't all Christian. Look at Franklin. Look at Jefferson. Even those two guys, I mean, Jefferson considered himself a Christian. He started a church, called it the Calvinistical Reformed Church of Charlottesville. But both those guys acknowledged a God that was actively involved in his creation. They were not deists. They certainly weren't agnostic or atheists. So even the non-Christians had a biblical view of life and appeal to God in their actions. That's the big
so well
difference
said.
and then and today.
And we got to leave it there. But Stephen McDowell, thanks so much. And listen to his brand new podcast on AFR.net. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at AFR.net.